All right, U.S. history students, today we're going to get into the New Deal. So let's start with the 1932 election. In the 1932 election, we see FDR come into the picture, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He is the Democratic nominee for president. He is running against Hoover, who was re-nominated as the Republican nominee. And Hoover had a very low approval rating, and so these two guys are going at it in 1932. And in that election, FDR wins overwhelmingly, taking control of the White House. The Democrats take control. They also win huge victories in the House and Senate, and so the Democrats are in control of the government in 1932, and we're going to see how they responded. You can see here that the election of 1932 was just such a landslide for FDR. The American citizens wanted a change. They wanted something new. They wanted a president who was going to try to do something, anything, to get them headed in the right direction and out of this Great Depression that they were in. So when FDR is elected, he promises Americans a new deal. Okay, so a new deal is what he's calling his plan, his legislation that he wants to pass. And the New Deal is FDR's plan to get the United States back on the right track. And it's a ton of different pieces of legislation that he gets passed because the Democrats have control of the Congress as well. And so we call this the first 100 days. It lasts from March to June of 1933, his first 100 days of office. And he does a ton during the first 100 days that he is in office, trying to get the United States out from under the Great Depression. All right, so FDR and Congress get to work. They get started passing laws, and they want to get people back to work, and the idea is through using deficit spending. So that's going to mean the country's going to go into debt, but we're going into debt, but we're going to get people back to work. We're going to get people's morale up. We're going to get them some food on the table, and we're going to help them out. So Congress passes about 15 major pieces of legislation that expanded the government's role in the nation and in the American citizens' welfare. And so the government is stepping in and is doing things to try to get people back to work, to get them money, food on the table, jobs, whatever, to try to get out from under the Great Depression. All right, so the first thing FDR wanted to do was to fix the banking system. So the banking system felt like was one of the major causes of the Great Depression. It's causing issues. So what he did is to kind of stop the bleeding and to give time to figure things out. He declared a bank holiday. He did this one day after taking office. He declared a bank holiday, shut down all of the nation's banks so that people could go in, figure out what was going on, and try to create a plan to fix it. And then he persuaded Congress to pass a law called the Emergency Relief Act, which allowed the Treasury Department to go in, inspect each of the nation's banks, figure out what the problems were, and help create a plan to solve the issues. So FDR, after he shuts down the banks and creates the holiday, tries to figure out what the problem is, he realizes that he needs to restore confidence in the banking system. And so he has Congress pass the Glass-Steagall Act, which created the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. What this did is it insured all the money that was in the banks. So if you put money in the bank, you knew that it was going to be safe. The bank couldn't lose it, or it couldn't just be gone randomly like what had happened to many citizens during the early banking crisis. So up to $5,000, if you had $5,000 in the bank and something happened to it, the bank messed up, the bank lost money, couldn't pay you your money back, the government would reimburse you your money. So you knew that your money was safe. That was FDR's idea. We still have the FDIC today, and now it's up to $100,000 that is safe, that the government will reimburse you if something happens to your money while it's in the bank. That's the FDIC. All right, here's three more important things that happened during the first 100 days, part of the New Deal. First one is the Federal Securities Act. Now, what happened was there was a stock market issue. People were not being truthful or accurate about the stocks in the stock market, so citizens were not informed as to what was going on. And so FDR wanted this law to be passed, the Federal Securities Act, which require that people are truthful, accurate with the information that they report about the stock market. And it created an agency, the SEC, which is going to go in, Security and Exchange Commission, which goes in and it regulates and makes sure that companies are being truthful with the public about the stock market, so that we don't have another stock market crash like we did before. The second, the Agricultural Adjustment Act. This is to help farmers. So farmers were hard hit during the 20s. They're still hard hit during the 30s. So FDR, to help the farmers, creates the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which this raised crop prices by lowering production. So they would pay farmers to not produce as much, pay farmers, they would buy up excess crops. The goal of this is to raise crop prices. Okay. And then the third one is the Tennessee Valley Authority. There's a hard-hit area in Tennessee, one of the poorest areas in the nation. And so to create jobs, the Tennessee Valley Authority is created, and this is to create dams up and down the Tennessee Valley on the rivers. Not only is it going to put people back to work by creating dams, but it's going to create much-needed electricity and water and different things that this area needs. So it's kind of twofold here. Here you can see where the TVA went to work. This is the Tennessee River Valley. You can see the major dams that were built by the TVA. We're going to go through a number of different agencies. We're calling them alphabet agencies because they all had letters that represented them. The first one is the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. This is to put people back to work. It's to create jobs. So people in the Great Depression, they don't have jobs. Let's create jobs, FDR said. Let's put them back to work. Let's get money in their pocket. Let's get food on their table. And let's get morale up. So the CCC is for men 18 to 25 years old. They built roads, parks, planted trees, did different things that the country needed, and the government paid them to do it. And so by 1942, towards the end of the Great Depression, when we're about to get into World War II, we have about 3 million men that are working for the CCC. The next thing is the FHA, the Federal Housing Administration. This is to help people to get into a house that they can afford, help them not lose their home. They gave people money for home mortgages, home repairs, provided home loans, so helping citizens get into and keep their houses. All right, so even though the New Deal had lots of fans, lots of Americans liked the New Deal, they loved that FDR was trying to get something done, there still were critics that emerged. There were people that didn't like it. There were people on both sides, Republicans and Democrats, that didn't like it. So liberals who were on the left felt like FDR was not doing enough. We need to do more. We need to make more jobs. We need to pass out more food. We need to help those who are in need. And right now, FDR, you're not doing enough, they said. And then there's the conservatives on the other side who said, you know what, FDR, you're doing way too much. The government should not get involved, should not intervene. We've got a free market economy. We've got a history based on laissez-faire, hands-off, not getting involved. And so we're doing too much. The economy will correct itself. We don't need to be spending all this government money and going into debt to try to solve this problem. This problem will solve itself, they said, on the right. And the Supreme Court also had things to say about FDR's New Deal. There were some things that the Supreme Court did not like about FDR's New Deal. The Supreme Court was somewhat of a conservative court, and they struck down several pieces of legislation. They struck down something called the NIRA, which gave too much government control over industry, the Supreme Court said. They also struck down the Agricultural Adjustment Act on the grounds that agriculture was a local matter. It wasn't something that the federal government should be involved in. And so they said, you know what, these New Deal legislations, they're unconstitutional, and we're striking them down. So obviously Roosevelt was displeased with the Supreme Court for striking down some of his legislation, his New Deal legislation that he felt was so important in helping the country get back on track, that he created a plan to get the Supreme Court to do what he wanted them to do. Now, he was afraid they were going to try to strike down new legislation, and so he proposed a plan that said, you know what, once a judge reaches 70 and a half years old, the president will get to add a new judge. So we're not going to kick off the old judge, but we're going to add a new judge. And so this would, at the time, there was 6 justices that were over 70 and a half years old. And so this was going to allow FDR to add 6 new justices, and he was going to add people that were going to obviously agree with him and fall in line with what he wants them to do and not strike down his legislation. Now, the American public was not behind this. Congress did not back him up on this. His plan got voted down, and it kind of looked like it was a power grab. People didn't like that the president was trying to overtake and take over the Supreme Court and kind of get them under his leadership and direction. They felt, most Americans felt like the Supreme Court should be its own independent thing and should not have to answer to the president. Now, even though FDR's court-packing scheme plan did not work, he still did gain control of the Supreme Court because he came up with this plan and kind of threatened those Supreme Court justices. They did not strike down any more of his legislation. And because there were so many justices that were old, FDR got to appoint new members. He got to appoint 7 new justices to the Supreme Court, which basically assured that his programs were going to continue into the future, because the Supreme Court was full of people that liked his ideas, because he got to appoint them when judges died or retired. FDR did have other critics that did not like his ideas or didn't feel like he went far enough. The first one is going to be Father Charles Coughlin, and he was kind of a radio preacher. He preached over the radio, had about 45 million listeners at the height of his popularity. And he called for more aggressive approaches, more liberal approaches. He wanted a guaranteed national income. So guaranteed annual income for all people. Everyone was going to make at least this amount of money. And nationalized banks, the government takes over the banks to distribute things more fairly. And so that was Charles Coughlin and his views. He was one critic of FDR's. Another critic on the other side that felt like FDR went too far was, his name was Huey Long. He was a senator. He was from Louisiana, and he was a harsh critic of FDR. He was going to run for president, and so he was criticizing FDR, establishing him as being different from FDR, and so he was trying to set up a run for president. He used the radio to broadcast his messages across the country. The radio was becoming very popular in the 1930s, but a gunman assassinated Long in 1935 before he was able to make a run at the presidency.